Yeah.
Welcome to Silverline Wednesday Wham, everybody. We've got a skeleton crew tonight for our special broadcast of this unique premiere episode that we're calling Wide Open Wednesday. What do you think about that, Aaron? Is that too
I like that.
strange? Or
No, I think
okay,
that totally works. I think most of the people have actually were just decimated from the convention last week and everyone was at. Just so
yeah,
people know how hard conventions are, people usually need a week to recover.
oh yeah,
So
oh
yeah,
yeah.
it just
So
decimates you.
oh yeah, man, I remember those days, and far be it from getting the con crud these days, right?
Oh
Because it
yeah,
has a whole different meaning than it used to, right?
oh yeah. Now there's a specific name for the con crud.
Right, exactly. So, seeing that it's wide open, what's on your mind tonight, Aaron? Was there anything you wanted to explore in the comic book world? Was it con related? Was it recent news in the industry, or maybe something you're working on?
Strangely enough, it's funny. My friend, let's see if I have it back here. It was my birthday Monday, and so my
Oh,
friend
well,
bought
happy
me.
birthday!
Do you know this series at all? Blade of the Immortal.
Uh, yes, Blade of the
Yes.
Immortal. Yes.
So he bought me the big book of this, and then of course I immediately had to go back and buy the next two. See what you do to your friends? You buy them the volume one, and it's like, well, yeah, well now I have to go buy the others.
Now I have to go. That's right.
I mean,
That's right.
come on.
Now, before we go deeper into this, I would be remiss if I didn't thank our sponsor, Daytona Beach Comic Convention, which of course is the convention that our esteemed colleagues recently attended. And reportedly had a blast. Have you debriefed with any of these folks?
I watched the videos. They posted. Roland posted 2 videos showing the convention. It looked a lot of fun. They had half an island, so there were a lot of Silverliners there. It was pretty cool.
I did see a photo. And it looked amazing. Like they had what we call prime real estate. The corner set up. So it literally was half. It was half an island.
Yeah, so I think it was like 4 tables, and then it went like that with 4 tables, and I think it was something like that. Yeah, there's a lot of people there. That Silverline represented definitely. Looked like a fun show. Yeah, it looked like it was in either a warehouse or maybe a hangar or something. I don't know. I was trying to figure out the building. It looked super fun. I got done with Rose City, not this last week and the weekend before. It was like the 12th and 10th through the 12th of September. That was fun, and that's our biggest one around here. That's just below like Emerald City or maybe like a quarter the size of San Diego.
Wow,
maybe.
That's still pretty big, dude.
It's pretty big. It's at our convention center. It's grown over the years. I think it used to be. There was a convention called Stumptown around here. Named after, I think it is a street or something in Portland named Stumptown. Great, I'm losing my Portland cred. That was a completely independent comic convention. It was independent comics only. It was really cool. Yes.
Sweet.
Which is, yes. So if anybody out there, Roland's listening, that con is unfortunately no more, but it was like a pristine, amazing convention. Anybody's in the independent comics, you went there. That, I think, grew into Rose City or was folded into it or somehow like that. Because Stumptown indie comic used to be our big convention. Then Rose City came in afterwards, and now that's our premier convention. But when I was a kid, it was Second Genesis, and it was like a flea market convention. We had them once, I think maybe twice a year, and it was like a fraction of the size of the other. Just like maybe a lot. It cost like $6 to get in and sell comics or whatever and stuff. And I sold some stuff there a few times, and it was a lot of fun. But that was more back when comic conventions are more like flea markets. People selling bootleg VHSs, which they don't do anymore.
Oh yeah,
all that stuff. So they
don't do that anymore. But that's coincidentally, that's how I got to actually watch Ninja Scroll.
Right? Oh really? Yeah.
Back in the day, it would have been that era.
Yeah, that's how a lot of the anime came over. My friend, when I first saw Akira, it was my friend, his brother was really into Akira and found the bootleg and had me watch it. And it just blew me away. I never seen anything like it. I grew up with like Star Blazers, which I guess is like Battleship Yamato, Starship Yamato. Which I always thought that cartoon was really funny because it's supposed to be aliens or invading Earth or something. I can't remember. And so they send this, they retrofit the Yamato, which was the flagship Japanese flagship during World War II, retrofit the ship that sank, and now it's going to save Earth. So it's like, take that, America. Which that's what I really thought. I was like, okay, that, you
Yeah,
know,
they're no. I mean,
yeah.
they're nationalists too. So
Yeah, so
it's what
it was a
is.
cool series. And they changed that to Star Blazers over here.
Mhm.
And then I think that was the anime, and then Robotech. I'm a huge Robotech fan. If you look in my room, I have Robotech toys everywhere. So
Mhm.
those are the
Mhm.
animes I started, but Akira took it to a whole nother level. Never seen anything like that when I first saw it.
What about Ghost in the Shell? Did that do
That
anything for you?
yeah, because I was in the Appleseed, and so when Ghost in the Shell came out, I knew what it was based on. I can't remember if I saw that in theaters. I did see that there was an Appleseed movie. All the Appleseed movies are CGI, and that came out in theaters. I went with me and my friend
Hmm.
Tom, and me and Tom have been friends for 28 years, maybe. And we met over Appleseed. We were in high school, and we both discovered we liked that comic, so we formed a friendship over that comic. And then I saw Ghost in the Shell, and that was amazing. In fact, I liked the Ghost in the Shell comic. I think the movie actually kind of maybe did a little better. It kind of took because I like Shiro, but in that comic he kind of just kind of rambled on about stuff. I'm like, dude, you got to focus. And I think the movie focused it a little better. So
Yeah, well, at times when you have very in-depth, complex, verbose
yeah.
stories, which they tend to be, because let's face it, they
Hmm.
get paid by the word. It seems like,
Yeah.
but streamlining things for a film often is a negative, but in some cases like this, I think it's a positive. Did you maybe you can enlighten me on this, as you're probably more in the realm of anime than I am, and that is, did Appleseed precede Blade Runner or no?
Appleseed, when I first discovered, and I remember when I discovered it in America. Now, I'm not sure how long it had been out in Japan. When I first
Okay,
discovered it, I was late 80s. I think
okay.
I got into comics with X-Men in middle school. I was
Hmm.
going
Hmm.
to, I think it was middle school. And then, which I graduated in 94, so middle school would be 80, like, 87, 89 for me, something of that. But
Sure,
we had a weird middle school. My middle school went 6, 7, 8, and then my high school was 9, 10, 11, 12. It
I've
was
heard of that.
weird. It was a little different because they usually
Hmm.
high school was the last three, it was the last four. So it was a little flip. So
Hmm.
late 80s, I discovered it. So Blade Runner preceded that. Now
Yes,
I
Blade
not
Runner's 82.
82, yes. So it
Hmm.
did precede. Now whether or not he was influenced by Blade Runner, I would assume so. I mean, the guy who
Well,
wrote all the
Philip K. Dick's
cyberpunk
novel,
was the
Do
one who
Androids Dream of
inspired the
Electric
movie.
Sheep, certainly proceeded with
Yeah,
that. Oh,
which was
we got a
Blade Runner
shout
was
out from a
loosely
friend of
based on that
mine.
book. Yeah.
My friend Jeff says, "What up, Dean?"
Hey,
Shout
what's up?
out to Jeff Calloway, the greatest trombone player in the country.
There's been a few. There was one
Hey,
movie,
Jeff.
that was the Watchmen movie. I actually thought the Watchmen movie was better than the book, and I know that's when the internet will destroy itself. I thought when I remember I read Watchmen well after the fact that came out. Like I remember
Sure.
when it came out, I'm like, "Ah, I wasn't into superheroes that much. So when it came out, I just didn't care. I liked, the
Alternative
X-Men.
storytelling.
Yeah,
Sure,
I think
sure.
one of the other books after I got into X-Men, the other superhero book was Elektra Lives Again, which is this big white book that Frank Miller did that was like painted. And so I was into like ninjas and sci-fi or whatever. Superheroes didn't do much. So when I read Watchmen, I read it well after the fact. Okay, let me read whatever this is. I think I read it from the library. And I remember when I got to the end and the big alien came down, and I'm going to give spoilers. And of course, if you guys haven't read it, then you're not in the comics. Um, you know,
If you haven't
uh,
read Watchmen, get out of here. No, go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah. I couldn't figure out what had happened because the page, like, there was and then there's this big alien leg, and I didn't know what had gone on. So it took me a while to figure out like what had happened. And I understood the idea was like, the alien comes down, and they have a force to unite the world to fight against. But my whole idea was like, well, yeah, but then the aliens aren't going to attack for a year or two, and then they're going to come back fighting again. It's just like, well, they're not showing up, and the aliens aren't a threat, and everybody's going to go back. So when he switched it, made a Dr. Manhattan the threat, I'm like, well, you basically have God watching you. That's much more effective, and that's everlasting because he's always out there watching you. So I'm like, that little tweak was actually a perfect tweak. It was almost one of those things I'm like, dude, why didn't Alan Moore think of that? Because it tied into the story. It made that character way more important in the story because he was the crux. And it was one little tweak. And after reading that, I'm like, you just made the story to me make much more sense because I never got the alien thing.
You
Like
never
I
got
knew,
the space squid. he beams in the space squid, right? Teleports
It kills
in.
everyone. But the idea was like,
kills everyone. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
The idea was like, well, we have a threat that there's going to be more aliens coming. And I'm like, yeah, but after a year or two, when no aliens show up, they're going to forget it and everyone's going to go back to fighting. But this way, if you had Dr. Mahan always watching like God, then everyone will behave forever. I'm like, okay, that's much more effective.
Yeah,
so
I can see your point. While I missed the space squid because I was anticipating it, I was like,
right.
oh my God, how in the world are they going to pull this off in the movie? Right.
Yeah.
But I understood, again, the two different creative arenas, right? You film, you can do much more literary, simultaneous dialogue and storytelling that's going against the visuals, that's supporting the visuals. You got the whole pirate story that's part of
that was, and he actually did do that. He animated that for the movie. There's an extra special edition where he implements that in.
Sure.
And then of course, if you watch the movie, you did notice that he took out the scenes where they were talking about the artist, because they showed scenes in the comic where they're making the space squid, like they showed this artist drawing a squid. They took those out. This stuff, the space squid, I know fit more with the sort of 50s superhero vibe he was going for, that sort of master evil plan, but it never quite. Because I'm like, your plan needs to be foolproof and that's going to last forever. It's going to be everlasting peace. And I didn't understand unless he made more space squids attack the city, that how are you going to make this a threat? But you have Dr. Manhattan out there always watching you.
Then it made a lot of sense.
That's much more effective. Yeah.
It made a lot of sense. Okay, quick question now that we're in the cyberpunk realm, sort of. Blade Runner, did you know that the intention was that Deckard was a replicant? Or did you think that was like retroed in urban legend, that they were trying to make it more interesting? Or did you think, no, Blade Runner's, that Deckard is an actual replicant? What did you think?
They always hinted at it, because what I remember, the original ending to the movie. Now I have the final cut. Now I can't remember if my DVD has. There was one they released like 5 cuts to the movie. I know the final cut is he goes driving off with the girl. They're on this freeway out of the city, which was such a departure because the cities are dreary, night, rainy, and then they're out in this like crazy sunny valley with trees. You're like, wait, I thought the world was decimated. Apparently not to the coast. But it was like, so that was a little, and it implemented the original ending, implemented that if he was a replicant, that he will die, and he's enjoying the last few days with her. But I can't remember in the original cut if the guy left the unicorn because at the end, did he leave it in the original cut?
In the original cut, they get into the elevator and the door shuts. But you do hear, I don't know if there's a unicorn. I do remember.
Because he makes a little unicorn out of the wrapper and he puts it down. Yeah.
Sure. I can't remember. If Jeff, if you're out there, if you remember whether the unicorn's in the original cut or not in terms of the origami, excuse me.
Yeah.
But the voiceover of the character that says, "You've done a man's job, sir," right? So the ambiguity of that, if you really think about what he's saying there, the implication to me was that Deckard was such a perfect human. He wasn't designed to be a superhuman like worker or, a pleasure model or whatever. He was designed to be the closest thing to human, which means he had the weaknesses of a human, right? Physically weaker, but he was strong enough to withstand the attacks of the far superior Roy Batty and the henchmen.
Right. So, and they said, because it was a 4-year time span in the movie, if I remember right. They lived 4 years and they died.
Yeah.
So he was, it's funny, and I saw the second Blade Runner, which a lot of people don't consider canon. Deckard was alive in there, but they also tried to make it. They still can't tell if he was a replicant or not, because again, I think it was, but it didn't make sense because I think he's right. The setup was edited out.
Right.
I think that was actually because they took out the dream sequence of the unicorn. But I need to watch the original cut. I prefer the edited cut without the voiceover. Strangely enough, like I get the voiceover, but I actually kind of like it as more of a straightforward sci-fi movie without it. I think there's more of an atmosphere without the voiceover. I always got the sense when I first saw the movie, I never got that he was a replicant. It wasn't until somebody else brought that up. My friend was into it, brought it up, the idea that he's killing his own, which makes it much more vile. That the fact that they're using replicants, it totally makes sense. I didn't seem like I can't remember the girl, the one that was supposed to be as close to human as possible. What the dark hair lady, I can't remember what her name was.
Rachel. Rachel.
Rachel. They kind of hinted at, if I remember right, that Rachel didn't have the time period built into her. That she didn't
No.
have the 4-year time span. I think she was more of a pet project by the guy who created replicants, so she would live forever. Um, I don't know. There's a part of it. It's like it's one of those, like, if it's ever answered, and they did bring it up in the sequel, and they never answered it, which I think people were happy. Even though he's aged, if all intents and purpose, if Deckard's still alive, then he's exceeded the 4-year limit, and he's not a replicant. But then again, so did Rachel, so maybe it wasn't built into him, so he can go back and forth. I think it works better if it's ambiguous. I don't know if it was actually permanently answered. If I think even if it did, that's kind of like when they made Wolverine's history. I remember when they were doing Wolverine, when they brought out the I think it was the series was called Logan, wasn't that? Or no, it was Origin. It was called Origin.
Origin.
Yeah. I remember reading an interview saying they were never ever going to reveal Wolverine's complete history. Never. But when they got the green light to do the movies, they said the movies would. And they were like, well, we can't let the movies do it first, so we've got to do it first. So the movies forced their hand to do this, but they were never going to. And I actually think it would be much better if it was never revealed in the book, but they said the movies forced their hand, which I thought was a little weird because I don't remember the movies ever doing that. They did do Weapon X, which was done in the comics before that. So I think they kind of jumped the gun and kind of I never liked the origin. I did not like the bone claws. I thought the bone claw idea was absolutely ridiculous. I just thought that was stupid. I always liked the idea that they implanted these weapons as sort of a covert weapon that he would have. Like that he could take anywhere. I did the bone claws. Every time those come up in the comics, I'm just like, no, I hate it.
I'm with you. I like the classic Wolverine to me, which is ideologically a technical werewolf, right?
Yeah.
Where instead of a mystical curse, you have a mechanical curse because he's basically like the replicants. He's affected by government experiments and then utilized by them really as a killer slave, really, who runs off
their bidding.
To do their bidding. And so I always liked that idea. Made him a very tragic character. Also liked Logan on his own better. It's weird, better than with the X-Men. I liked him as a wandering samurai character.
That made much more sense. I always remember him when I first read it. I always remember him from the X-Men. The other thing they did is they augmented his healing ability way too much. Like I think I remember one of the later comics, they got him down to a cell and he rebuilt himself from a cell. In the comics, I remember it was the Fall of the Mutant storyline. There was a scene, and that's why I first started reading X-Men, where he was shot. And he said in the comic, Wolverine was talking, he said, it usually takes me an hour to heal from a gunshot wound. Which I thought was, okay, so it's a limitation. So if he is shot multiple times, he could technically bleed out in an hour. So there's a little bit, okay, so he's invulnerable, he's not that invincible. And then, of course, later on, they made it like he heals almost instantaneously. In the comics, it was never written. He actually had that, because he was hiding in his rubble, letting it heal. So he could heal fast, but it was not instantaneous. And they've made him literally almost impenetrable. Like, he just cannot. I mean, I remember there was somebody said, like, yeah, he came from a cell and rebuilt himself. I'm like, okay, come on. I don't know. It's a little beyond. You're making him technically a god. But the healing factor was that there were limitations to it, which I like that. And there always needs to be limitations to powers. I always think that's important.
That's a perfect segue too. And because of your background, you have comprehensive experience reading a lot of philosophy, which you and I like to talk about at times. And I've always wanted to ask you this question live and share it with our viewers and listeners. And that is Aliens versus Predator. Who's the real villain and why?
The real villain is the Predators, because in the comic, when they sit there, they host them, they breed them to be prey. That was always, but the Predator don't see it as that. They're sports hunters. So it's one of these that I think the aliens in that facsimile are the victims, and they're fighting back against. And of course, did you read the original comic, the original 4-issue? Okay.
Yes.
I thought there was really some cool. One thing I thought was really cool is they gave the aliens full plated armor because they were fighting aliens, so they had to protect from the acid. Also, they actually used shotguns. I remember one of them actually had like a shotgun with the heat, which I thought was such a cool idea. And then, of course, in the movies it did away with all that. I'm like, oh, of course, whatever. But in the comic, it was like they actually augmented their gear and hunting style for the aliens, which I thought was cool. But then again, strange enough, I almost may say the real victims of that whole scenario would be the animals that they send that get basically impregnated by the aliens to make the aliens they hunt. I mean, because they send them to these planets and then they impregnate the animals,
Right,
and then so
right.
that might be the actual victim in the whole thing. But the predators are
here
always.
You go. You've touched on an excellent point, and that is that the predators are the exploitative race here, right?
Yeah.
Because really, even in as much as I love those movies as horror movies for the first one, as an action movie for the second one, they are really natural animals that have been, you've stumbled upon them, and they're doing what natural predators do. They're going to defend their territory. They're going to eat to survive. And they're going to do what, wasps and spiders do. They're going to sting their hosts, sometimes lay eggs in the host, sometimes feed off the insides of the host, whatever. And people are like, oh, that's so gross. They're just monsters. They're evil. They're not really evil, though. They're kind of like great white sharks. They're not really. Yeah. They're just doing what they do, and you got in their way, dude. So,
right. And that's always the ability. If the aliens, we've always associated that with if animals could speak or we could communicate with them, they are higher on the food chain of worth saving. This is why, like one guy, this was a Jack Handy thing, which I thought was funny, but actually kind of made a little bit of weird sense. He's like, if trees screamed, would you cut them down? And then he said, like, well, it was something like, it's like, well, maybe if they just sat around and screamed all the time, right? But it made, I mean, if we, this is like certain things react. This is why animals, like some people kind of animals, some don't. I mean, you would have, like, again, it's easier for people like, I completely admit this, much easier for me to eat meat because I'm not watching the slaughtering process and I'm not seeing where it comes from. So there was a disassociation with that. But yeah, for the most part, we usually, so since the aliens don't speak and don't really seem to talk to each other, they're evil because they're animals. They can't communicate. Now, if the aliens had a sophisticated, like, organization that was coming to planets and overtaking them, and it was like, we could talk and speak to each other, we might see them a little differently. We see animals as lower, and of course that comes some religious ideas have that as animals are supposed to be subservient to men, and of course I'm always like, well, really, then jump in the water with the great white shark and see how that turns out.
Wouldn't work out too well.
I don't think it would have worked out. It's just
it's interesting though that we cast the aliens as enemies all the time, and yet, like you say, I've always seen the aliens in Alien as something to survive, very much like Jaws. Something
almost like a space version of a great white shark. They're epitome of the perfect predator, and they're doing, and that's how I always saw them. So you've seen the movie The Thing, right?
Of course.
Yeah. Okay. That's been planned on HBO, and that was another one where Prey, who's the evil one. In that movie, if you watch the movie, because it's always portrayed that the Thing is evil, but if you actually watch the movie, it seems like the Thing is actually just trying to get away. It's because it builds a spaceship at the end. It's been frozen there. It's awakened now. It's trying to get home. So if you actually watch the movie, the real perpetrators, the real evil people, are the humans who keep killing it and trying to stop it from leaving. It's an interesting thing, but if you actually watch the movie with that mindset, it all makes sense, because like, why is he building a spaceship? So he can go home. But we don't understand so we keep killing it, and so it's like, why is it trying to hide? It's trying to hide so it can get away. It was always a strange, because after you look at it, you're like, well, this poor thing's a victim. It crash landed on this planet. It's trying to get away from these humans that keep trying to kill it, and it doesn't make it. And so
what do you do? Okay, so this brings me to this question too. This is another sort of broad overview, a comprehensive question. People tend to feel divided. I don't know why people feel like they have to choose between Marvel Cinematic Universe and DC Cinematic Universe, right? But everybody feels like, oh, you're on one side or the other. I enjoy them both for what they are. I always tell people, I like to eat, hamburgers all the time, and then upscale hamburgers at the hoity-toity hamburger shop, and then sometimes fast food, and then sometimes you want a steak, and then sometimes you want a filet mignon, right? And they're all good. Like, I don't feel like I would have an allegiance to one or the other. So that being said, as a huge disclaimer, do you think that the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and Jeff, if you feel like you want to wade in on this, because I know you'll have a strong opinion on this, do you feel like the Marvel Cinematic Universe might be relying on pop culture references and popular music as a crutch to better storytelling to connect with the audience? Now,
Yeah.
one could argue, well, they're going for a different tone than, say, Zack Snyder's Justice League, right? That's supposed to be a serious, end of the world tone. But then I would counter that Taika Waititi's Thor Ragnarok is basically almost like a dark comedy, right?
Yeah.
Because it opens with one of my favorite songs, right? The Immigrant Song by Led Zeppelin. So
Which they must have paid a fortune to get that song, because I know Led Zeppelin.
Can you imagine, right?
They had the money to do it, yeah.
The brilliance of linking Zepp to Thor, that song specifically.
Especially that song. Yeah.
Yeah, it was very nice. So anyway, but then my question becomes, okay, so if I write a story and it gets sold into a screenplay and I buy the rights to put Stairway to Heaven as the opening titles, I mean, is everybody, okay, all right, dude.
Yeah.
Like, doesn't it feel a little bit pandering? I mean, is it, because when I first saw Guardians of the Galaxy, and James Gunn has his detractors and people who love him, whatever. But I was kind of like, okay, dude, your soundtrack is awesome. I love this music too. But are you using it just to endear the audience to you? What would you have done if you just had incidental music for the background, right? Yeah. Was it intrinsic to the story? I'm just going to let you, I'm just throwing the question out there. I'm going to let you.
So this actual answer might go back a little ways to get up to the answer you want.
Okay.
So, So this has to do with the quote unquote hipster movement that I generally have seen develop out of Portland. Okay. So I had friends, and the best way, it took me a while to figure out the hipster move. I would have friends that everything was ironic or cheesy or goofy, but that was the joke, that was the funniness. So like I had a friend who would go in, I remember one day he's like, we went into Portland and went to a record store and bought a bunch of 80s records because it was cheesy and ironic and it was this goofy thing to do, right?
Got it. Yeah.
But it's a form of also mocking it a little bit, because you're mocking the fact that it's old, it's outdated, it's no longer in vogue. So let's go do these things that are no longer in vogue and kind of make them, not try to make them cool, but almost like laugh at them. So I'm a big fan of Family Ties, the show Family Ties, right? Most of my friends, that show's a little too outdated, too cheesy for them, too outdated. I watch it and like it. They watch and be like, this is just, it's too cheesy. It's too, so they would almost kind of make fun of it because of the cheesiness factor. It's like watching old 70s shows and making fun of the bell bottoms, right? Sure. Okay. So we get up, because when I was young, if you like comics or whatever, you were a nerd or whatever, you were making fun
same
of.
Here.
So the best way I thought, because when you look at the early Marvel, Disney movies, they were more serious, less that comedic tone. That came more and more into it as the hipsters got a hold of this. And it was almost in a way, a lot of the modern Marvel movies is a way of like, it almost is a way when they sell it to me, it's like Disney's almost saying like, we know this is stupid, we know this is cheesy, we know this is goofy, so we're going to sell it to you with a little tongue-in-cheek humor to go along with it. That really started with Joss Whedon's Avengers. And then that got super popular. It's like, oh, this is good. And then it's just taken off. This is why you see little chibi cute versions of Marvel superheroes or whatever. If you actually, this is why when I tell people when they watch the Marvel cinematic movies, like, these are the stories you read. And I'm like, no, these are not the stories we read, because they are a form of almost mocking themselves within the context of the story. Everything's a joke. Nothing's taken seriously, right? This is, and Marvel continuously undercuts. It's like, so basically undercuts, like I remember when Ragnarok fell at the end, and it's like this, their entire city's being destroyed. It's a poetic moment. And then you have some alien crack a joke about, well, if the support's good, and that I'm like, okay, so am I supposed to feel sad about this? Because as far in the content of the movie, every time anything dramatic happened, you cut it with this stupid joke. And the reason to me is that it goes back to that hipster thing. Well, yeah, because we know it's stupid and ironic. Anything we try to do serious has to be cut with this stupid joke because it's cheesy and ironic. This, in my head, I know what I'm talking, and I hope that it makes sense or whatever. It's sort of this feeling. And Disney and Marvel have Like, just basically put the hammer down and done everything. So to me, when I watch the Marvel movies, instead of being like fun and like the comics, it's way these hipsters going like, yeah, we took your cheesy, stupid stuff you were into and we made it cool with all the stuff we're into.
Right.
And it's
Well,
like, okay, that's
I
not
get
what we're into. And they're basically selling people this Marvel universe that was not the Marvel universe we read. It is to a degree, but it is not. Like when they made Ultron, like this quippy guy makes all these jokes. Like Ultron was like the Terminator. He was like the devil incarnate. No, we can't do that.
right,
It's got to be goofy and stupid and make stupid jokes. I'm like, okay. I'm
right.
like, if you're not going to take the source material seriously, why should I?
I'm gonna interject here.
So,
Our viewer Jeff Calloway says
yeah.
Gunn used music for unerring storytelling
hmm
compared to original Suicide Squad. Eye rolling pedantic music scores,
Yeah.
and then he follows that up with Gunn has the ear of a DJ, not an ad exec. Well,
Yeah.
that's a good point. My question was more, does it take the viewer out of the fantasy universe?
Oh, yeah.
I'll give you an example. To me, it's a taste thing. Some people like it. Some people respond to it, and that's totally cool. Some people, like me, it takes me out of the story. I'll give you an example. The example would be, I feel like if today's Marvel Cinematic Universe made Lord of the Rings, right?
Yeah.
There would be a moment when Gandalf looks at the Balrog and goes, I think I just peed my robe. Okay.
Yeah.
So again, pop culture reference,
Mhm.
right? Makes everybody laugh. Oh, that's so cool. You just kind of mocked the fact that he's a wizard and he's got,
Yeah.
it's like, okay, that's one way to do it, but it also completely then pulls you're
Yeah.
out of Middle Earth all of a sudden. And there was a joke put in by Peter Jackson about never toss a dwarf. Remember that?
Yeah.
At the bridge of Khazad-dûm, right? I got the reason why he did that because at the time there was dwarf tossing and jokes about it, and it was part of
Yeah.
the urban lexicon, et cetera, et cetera. However, again, that pulled me out of the moment of the bridge of Khazad-dûm, right? There we are.
Right.
We're at a very critical moment in Fellowship of the Ring. We are in the environment that created Dungeons and Dragons, right?
Exactly.
An entire franchise world. And you're going to do a joke to undercut the drama. Now, some people go,
Yeah.
well, it's good, Dean, because if you do that, it releases the tension and keeps the drama from being overly dramatic and looking stupid and silly. I understand that. And that's the way a lot of the early James Bond movies got away with doing a lot of violence.
Right.
Bond would throw a quip out. He'd shoot somebody in the heart with the
Yeah.
spear gun and then go, I think he got the point. Right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
I get that for James Bond because it's a contemporary story. But if you're creating a fantasy realm, I find you have to be very judicious, in my
Yeah.
opinion, when to use pop culture, when to use humor. I think Marvel has made that decision, and that's great. But I think it's sort of DC should think about whether they want to go all the
Yeah.
time in that direction or whether they want to pick and choose. Because honestly, Zack Snyder's cut of Justice League has none of that.
Yeah.
And it completely absorbs you into the world.
Exactly.
And I think honestly that the film itself will endure the test of time a lot longer because it did not choose to use pop culture, modern music, etc., etc.
They're going to outdate themselves. This is the thing they don't realize about the Marvel movies. 20 years now, they're going to be watching the Marvel movies and going like, did they make a joke about an iPhone? Do you guys remember when we had iPhones? Like, it's going to be nostalgic.
Yeah,
You're
right.
going to outdate. You're outdating yourself basing it on the real world. That's what's in vogue. And I do think Lord of the Rings, when it cuts that, especially with Lord of the Rings, you were saying, if you're making this world, why would these characters, you kind of have to keep them in there once you break them out of that world. And I think they try to do it. This is a Hollywood thing. They want it, the idea is to sell as many tickets as possible.
Sure.
So the best way to sell many tickets as possible is dumb it down or, and relate it to people's everyday lives. And it's like, well, yeah, okay, yeah. So like they get a joke or like, like they're watching a movie that's a little weird and then, oh, well, yeah, I got that joke. So they're not just getting like sci-fi fans away. I mean, superheroes. I mean, they wanted to get non-comic book readers. How do you do that? Relate it to people go through every day. It's like, okay, yeah, I get it. But to me personally, as a comic book reader, I'm like, yeah, but that's not why I came to see the movie.
Right,
I came to see the movie to escape into that world.
Right. So again, you're enlightening for us is that this is mostly about appealing to the widest audience
Yeah, it's
possible.
possible.
And you and I are more concerned. It's a good thing we're in independent comics and we don't
Yeah.
have huge budgets, like
Yeah.
investors, depending on what we decide, that are not screaming at us over the phone like, you can't do that. Kids don't
Yeah.
like the color yellow, dude. You
Yeah,
can't
or
make
something
your
like that. Yeah.
superhero wear a yellow, So luckily, the thing is, when it becomes a machine just to make money, right? Then you start to compromise the content. Now, what I've always said in these discussions is, why does it have to be a binary choice? Why can't it make money and be awesome, right?
Yeah.
So here's an example. I don't think Star Wars has a contemporary reference, no contemporary music connection to it.
It was its own thing.
The music is 19th century romantic idiom, right? Completely out of touch with the time that the film was made, because everything is synthesizers and
disco
like
and all
cool
that. Yeah.
music. Right. And so they do 19th century, orchestra, and they don't really make any pop. There's no pop culture other than very mild reference with Han Solo, hot wiring his hot rod, the Millennium Falcon. But that's such like a subtle reference to the cool guy that has his car that breaks down all the time. But
and he's got it with a
rod or whatever. So that's like the only, but everything else is true to that world. And I really don't remember any sort of dependency on trying to make it a 70s thing. Now, granted, there were unintentional subliminal 70s influences in it, the hairstyles being the most obvious, right? But other than that, Star Wars stands the test of time, I think, because it is its own world. And people loved it because it was its own world. And I think you're right. I think ultimately one has to make that choice. Do you go for sort of the easy route? Hey, dude, let's find out what the most popular song is and put it in our soundtrack. Or do you go for, we're going to stay true to the content of this material, like Justice League does? It's just the content of the material. I can't think of a pop culture reference there.
Not that I remember.
Maybe Aquaman's attitude is a little, heavy metal surfer, but that kind of fits what Jason Momoa is doing with them. So it works.
And I think this also comes with the strange enough with the advent of the internet. I know movies have gotten much more expensive to make. Same thing with video games. So the one thing is, me and my friend Tom have talked about this with movies a lot back when, because it seemed like movies, the blockbuster idea exploded late 70s. I mean, Jaws was supposed to be the first blockbuster idea. They were making these movies in a relative vacuum. People who were making the movies kind of knew what was cool, but there was no way to measure what was like the coolest thing. Like the internet, you can kind of measure trends. You can see trends. You can see things popular. It's very, very easy to do. Back then, these people were just making movies because they wanted to. And I think a lot of times they were coming out of a Hollywood where they were like, they almost like the ad execs haven't really come down. They still saw movies as a form of art. Like, oh, you got a cool story? We'll make a movie, tell a cool story. Right.
Yeah, sure.
Nowadays, with so much money pumped into these movies, they're going to do everything they can to make sure they get that money back. And so they're going to dumb it down and make as many pop culture references as possible to draw those crowds in. This goes to me like the sort of internet, the idea of like ads everywhere. And it's not like they didn't do ads in the old movies. You watch old movies, you see like a Coke can with the Coke or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
But it seems like, you'll sit there and see internet jokes that like a joke is trending on the internet. That'll be in the movie. The reference, pop culture here and there, video games, movies, where they reference. It used to be just they'd reference video games in general. Now they're reference specific Nintendo things or comic book things. That to me is just to make sure they appeal to the broadest audience to get their money back. What it does, like you said, is instead of telling a coherent story, the story starts to feel like a mishmash of all these little pieces, telling a story, and then all these little pieces giving the old wink, wink to you. And that's why when I tell people, if you can, like I actually told, as I think I was talking to my friend Tom or whatever, you can sit there and remember the plot almost verbatim of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Pretty easy. You remember.
Yes.
Do you remember the exact plot of the Avengers movie?
Yes.
Like
no.
how much?
Well, okay, wait.
It gets a little confusing, doesn't it?
You're talking about the first one.
The first Avengers. Do you remember the general verbatim, generally how that went?
Yes.
See how it gets a little confusing.
Really.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
this is what I
yeah.
talk about. When people don't kid yourself. They always want to they're always going to want to make money. And I'm not saying they didn't in the old days. It was a different way. They wanted to make the sort of spectacle. So it was like Star Wars was a spectacle and stuff. But I mean, even when he made Star Wars, he was on a shoestring budget, and he got, denied a lot. There was a guy that just decided to take a chance on Lucas and give him the money to make it, and almost everyone on that movie thought it was going to fail. They just thought they didn't know what they were making.
Right.
They've talked to Carrie Fisher, there's interviews with Carrie Fisher and Mark Hamill, like they didn't know what this was. They didn't know. They just had no idea. So that was a complete shot in the dark for him.
Right.
But again, there's also a much more simpler plot. And I think the plot is simpler, exactly what you say, because it's all kept within the context of the movie. The scenes, the references are kept in the context of that world. They're not breaking the fourth wall, which they do all the time now. And that breaking of the fourth wall, like you said, brings people out of the story. And then when it comes back to the story, you're like, what was happening? What was going on? I've watched modern movies, and by the end of the movie, I'm like, what were they doing again?
What were they doing?
Like, you actually think, yeah.
Roland says, I remember the plot of the first Avengers movie better than the Raiders.
Really? See, now that I remember Raiders of the Lost Ark much, much better.
Yeah.
Than the first Avengers. Yeah.
I remember it very well. I think Avengers was just Loki has the Tesseract, so he's super powered, and he wants to take over the world.
But then you have the aliens coming in or something with Thanos.
Yeah, there's a portal. The aliens are going to come in,
and then he gets captured, and I guess he's doing stuff when he's captured, and the movie plots it seems like movie plots have gotten complicated or tried to get complicated for no real reason, especially superhero movies. And I think they're trying to do the old comic book. You have the main storyline, then the subplots to tie into the other movies and stuff. Fight Nazis, get artifact.
Okay.
But still, you know how...
But see, that's so cool. That is the plot. Basically,
that is the plot.
Nazis want an artifact that is super powerful, that is supposed to have divine powers. They want to hijack the divine powers so they can take over the world. It backfires on them because they're evil and the divine powers are good. They get burned. Boom. That's it.
Right.
Now, the cool part is we get to know a really cool professor adventurer during that plot. We get to know him and what his character is like. And if you were into, ancient artifacts and serial adventures and that sort of action feel, I was taken by surprise completely going to see Raiders. I mean, it was so memorable for me because I didn't expect the supernatural divine powers stuff at all. I expected just a pure action adventure movie.
Yeah.
So that added an element to it.
He's actually kind of proving my point in a weird way by saying this. Thank you, Roland.
He is, because it's so
he
simple.
Is kind of because now try to at the Avengers movie. Okay, I was just saying that for 30 years. But try to. I mean, because you can sit there like, well, in the Avengers movie, Avengers fight Loki. But are they fighting Loki or are they fighting Thanos? What about the other aliens? Is that who they're fighting? And why does Loki get, and so they're fighting Loki, but there's much more going on. And then what was the purpose of the Tesseract?
Yeah, well, the Tesseract is that magic thing, that MacGuffin.
It was the MacGuffin, the thing they're all fighting over. I mean, you could go either way, but I'm just saying I've watched many movies and I come out going like, hey, there's a lot of stuff happen. There's a lot of action. There's a lot of jokes. This is why I like John Wick so much, because it's just a straightforward movie. This is, again, why I say Die Hard works so much. Man trapped in a tower fights for his life. Just works. I'm not saying every plot has to be simple. I'm just saying every plot has to have a definitive goal. But did Loki want to overtake the world? See, that's my problem. Did he? Because he was letting in the aliens. So was he doing Thanos' bidding? Or did he want to overtake the world for himself?
I assume he wanted some sort of position in the power structure.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So then maybe that's right. It's been a while since I've seen it. So but it just seems like, like you watch the Terminator movies. The Terminator movies actually have a little bit of, intricate plot. It's super easy. Terminator's trying to kill John Connor. What else is there? This is nothing. That's it. And he made an entire movie. The
Yeah.
thing is you were talking earlier about making jokes or whatever that cut tension. James
Yes.
Cameron is a master at tension without doing that. His Terminator movies and stuff and like even the Avatar movie were fantastic movies. He's really good at building tension, and he doesn't take you out of it. He keeps building it and building it. Aliens is another classic movie. I'm constantly building the tension, constantly. I mean, when you first see Aliens, nobody expects Bishop to be ripped in half by an alien queen on the ship. I mean, who saw
No,
that coming?
and to be and to really to play off of what you're saying,
Yeah.
the humor in Aliens is excellent because he's not winking and looking at
Mm-mm.
the audience, right? When Hudson's like, "Man, game over, man, game over, man. Those
Yeah,
things
it's
are
a
gonna come out.
reference
They're
to what's
gonna
going
take
on.
us out," and it's like, "Can that shit, Hudson?" So the point is, in that movie, the humor comes from real
Hmm.
fear from the people. And so again, you're never taken out. They
Yeah,
never start playing like the Jaws theme in the middle of the movie, right? They
right.
never do anything stupid like, "Man, I think I just shit my pants." No
Yeah,
one does anything stupid. They act the way they would really act under that level of stress, right?
exactly.
And
You can see
the
this guy
humor
completely losing
comes
his
from that.
mind. Yeah,
Right.
you
And
can see him
Hudson
losing it.
also reacts to Newt, the little girl that they find marooned on the station, right?
Hmm.
And that's how they try to calm him down, right? And so I think the quote is somewhere, I'm paraphrasing here. The I think Sigourney Weaver's character says this little girl survived so many months by
Yeah,
herself, and Hudson says, "Why don't we put her in charge,
I know.
man?"
He's just losing it.
That's
He's
funny, but again, it doesn't take you out of the world.
It's part of and the reason why it's happening is because of the situation that is happening. He's losing it because of what's happening. And so it's one of these things that I think, yeah, it's just yeah. And I'm just using modern movies. I'm not picking on Avengers movies. God knows there's been many movies I have seen recently that are not Avengers movies, Marvel movies that are
Sure.
very overcomplicated in plots, to the point where it's almost like the movie doesn't start out with the. I think one of the reasons, and I could be wrong, is there's so many writers. Movies used to be written by one writer, and every time you see a movie, it's written by like 3 different people, and they're not editors. They're writers rewriting it, and so like that's why a lot of people, you get plot lines that go nowhere, dead end. I've heard because somebody will start out a story and then somebody rewrite it and then forget about that plot line he was doing, but keep it in, and so it just gets lost. Um, but I've seen this, and I don't really necessarily understand why they tried to complicate so many
I'll tell
more
you why.
stories.
They don't intentionally do it. Again, ultimately, their focus is so much on bottom line, which again, Roland's correct.
Yeah,
It always was, but in today's marketplace, they're so focused on the bottom line, they believe a lie. The lie that they believe is that good creative storytelling can be calculated. Okay. And that's
that's
why one
good.
of my
That's a good point.
team's mottos is creativity beyond calculation. There is
Yeah,
an element of, call it magic, call it intuition, call it creative inspiration, whatever you want to quantify, whatever you want to label it.
yeah,
There is an element of random mystery and magic to a creation.
there
You
is.
cannot calculate whether it's not a mathematical theorem that can be calculated. As much as advertising executives, as much as movie moguls want to say,
Yeah,
"Well, I can tell you, our marketing team is so good. Our bean counters are so good. We can tell you that if we put this actor, use this music, use it." Well, you're going to get some of that back,
mhm,
but it's not going to be an over the top like an auteur is going to do. Like you mentioned James Cameron, right?
yeah.
I'll give you a more modern one. Zack Snyder.
Oh
Okay.
yeah, I love Zack
An
Snyder. Yeah,
often divisive creator. He is a perfect throwback auteur to the style of, and I'm not making an equivalency here, but to the style of Orson Welles, right? Stanley
hmm,
Kubrick. Those guys that were like, "Look, you guys shut up and write the checks. Let me write it and direct it, and you'll make money. Just shut up and write the
Quentin
checks.
Tarantino is
You're not
another
creative
classic
people.
example of this. Yeah,
You don't know how to do this. I know how to do this," right? And
exactly.
that was back when they would let a guy do that. Now they won't
Yeah,
even allow that. Now they laugh you out of the room. Be like, "No, we're going to get our highly paid screenwriters to all sit down in a room, and teamwork is better." And
yeah,
no, teamwork is not better with creative endeavors. Sorry guys, it's not.
yeah.
Creative vision is better. the more singular their creative vision, very often, the more
Mm-hmm.
unique and startling and inspiring material it will become. Now, I'm not saying that collaborations don't work well. Look at Lennon and McCartney, right?
Yeah.
And look at some of the Marvel movies. Some of them are more successful than others. But I would submit Favreau's Iron Man is still one of the strongest in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Is stable. Why? Because there wasn't a lot of money running on that, because it wasn't the MCU yet, right?
Yeah.
It was just starting. They didn't know. They didn't know what they were doing. So Favreau goes in and he goes, okay, look, this is going to rely heavily on RDJ's personality, because nobody knows or cares who Tony Stark really is.
Exactly.
No name. This is a third-tier book in the Marvel stable. Nobody knows anything about it. I'm going to go in and I'm going to perfectly balance action adventure with some humor, but I'm going to let RDJ be RDJ. And the magic of that worked. And it's because I think because they trusted Favreau. They're doing the same thing with Mandalorian. They're trusting him with Mandalorian. Yeah. And look, he's hitting another home run. Does it work every time? No. My friend Jeff knows. I mean, it doesn't work every time.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes you trust a guy with a vision, it goes down the garbage chute. But that's the risk of good creativity. I would submit to you that the most satisfying creative endeavors are not by committee.
Yeah.
They're by the vision of a singular creator or a minimal group of creators, maybe a partnership and so on. But the more cooks you get in the kitchen to sort of calculate, oh, this is going to be cool. The kids are going to love this because we're going to throw this in and we're going to throw that in. Yeah, you might do okay, but is it going to be something really quality that lasts the test of time? No.
Yeah.
That's why. And again, look at here's a reference for you. Apocalypse Now, right?
Oh yeah.
Producers were going to kill him for taking all that time on that, right?
Oh, yeah, he took forever on that. It was like, how many years did he take to do that?
Over budget. It was a train wreck. But because of the content matching the struggle of making the film, and just it was a perfect storm of misadventure,
right?
That translated into the storytelling, because the story was about the chaos and the fog of war. So the chaos and the fog of making that movie bled into the content, and it turns out to be this classic. Now, did it make huge amounts of money for the studio? Maybe in retrospect, maybe over time it did.
Yeah.
As a cult movie, it did. The Godfather, was that calculated? It was a good novel first, and it was a decent adaptation of the novel, right? Again, Jaws, adaptation of a novel, but mostly Steven Spielberg's take
on it. Yeah. Jurassic Park, Spielberg, same with Jurassic Park.
Spielberg's take
on it and stuff. Park. I think there is a singular vision. This is why Quentin Tarantino's, I consider one of the last of the sort of classic directors, and that Quentin Tarantino, in other words, he is using the strengths of film to make his film. Like, he understands the language of film to make his film. Like, a lot of the stuff that Quentin couldn't work outside of film. And I think anybody who's a good filmmaker understands the strengths and weaknesses of the film. And I think he's one of them. I think Peter Jackson in some ways has done that too in some of his other stuff. So there are still, but there's becoming very rare. Yeah, a lot of the old art directors or movie directors were artists using movies as a visual medium. And I think that's been lost a lot because of committee, because they want to get that money back. And I think you're right. Because look, I mean, most of the movies, we've been milking the 80s movies how long now? Reboots.
Right.
I mean, it's like, the guy who played the Falcon, I think his name is Mackie. I can't remember. Is it Kevin Mackie or the guy who plays the Falcon in the Marvel universe?
Gosh, you just scared it out of me. He does a tremendous job.
Yeah, he's fantastic. There's an interview he did. He was talking at a convention, I think, and he was talking about Hollywood and how like movies like The Goonies and stuff just couldn't be made today. Just couldn't be made. And I think he was talking just because studios are so unwilling to take chances unless there's a guarantee. I mean, look at the original movie Tron, which is one of my all-time favorites.
Right.
Like that.
Absolutely.
That movie was fantastic, but today, like the new Tron, I thought was okay, but it tanked because it was okay. But the original one, could you get a movie that looks like that today? No.
No,
It just looks
no,
so
you
different,
couldn't.
so unlike anything anyone's ever seen before, and it still
The
does
the
to this day.
the actor is Anthony Mackie.
Anthony Mackie, yes,
He does a tremendous job
he's a
as
really smart guy, and I really like but he did. If anyone out there looking up, he talked at a convention. He was talking about Hollywood and stuff. How those movies that we adore today, like Goonies and Jaws or whatever, can't be made today in the current Hollywood structure. And I'm like, and I think he's right in a way.
It's a shame. It really is a shame because what we lost was that auteur view. I'll give you some examples, and when you start listing them, you start realizing, like you said, how much modern movie makers and modern storytellers depend on this decade of time. I'll grab a decade from 75 to
Yeah,
85. Here we go. Godfather, Godfather Part 2, Jaws, Star Wars. I'll include Empire and Return of the
yeah,
Jedi with that. Alien, Blade Runner, Indiana Jones, Rambo, First
yeah.
Blood and Rambo, Terminator. All right, those franchises alone, just right there, billions and billions of dollars still
Right,
being milked today.
right,
But
exactly.
where are those innovative like things? You say, well, Dean, the equivalent today are all the Marvel movies because they're making all the billions of dollars and they're based on things that were created in the past. Ah, look who we
Hey,
have.
hey, Brent.
Hey.
Brent, welcome to Wednesday Wham's Wide Open Wednesday subject, which means
Yeah,
you can talk about anything you want to talk about. We've just been ragging Hollywood for the past hour.
they need
What's
it. It's
going on
good
with
for
you,
them.
my friend? What's happening?
Well, it's a wide open Wednesday Wham.
It is indeed.
Wacky. Wacky. What's going on? Not a lot. It looks kind of like some people were out sick today or something.
Yeah. The
Yeah, I
con
think we had
destroyed a
birthday
lot of them.
celebrations and previous commitments and so on. So we're missing a lot of the usual suspects. But we were talking about, and you could speak to this in a unique perspective because of your experience here. We were talking about the fact that it's been said that movies that launched billion-dollar franchises, and we quoted some of them being Jaws, Star Wars, Rambo, Indiana Jones,
Aliens,
Alien,
Predator. I think
all
I
of
would throw in
this.
there. Yeah,
Yes, all there. It's been said that couldn't be done today because of how the structure of Hollywood works, how there has to be a guarantee of return on ROI, return on investment, and so on. Tell us a little bit about your experience with why you believe or agree or disagree with the fact that a movie like, say, Jaws, could that be made today? What do you think? Thoughts, input?
Well, that's a tough question because, do you mean made today because back then it was a risk?
yeah.
What was risky about it back then?
Well, let me say it this way. I think Star Wars might be a better example because
Yeah.
Lucas got turned down by everybody. He goes to
Mhm.
Alan Ladd over at 20th Century Fox, and Ladd's like, okay, look, it's kind of it sounds like kind of a cool Flash Gordon thing. You couldn't get the rights to Flash Gordon, so you're kind of doing that. Okay, all right. We'll release this thing. We'll distribute it, whatever. Then people see the screener, and because even with Marshall Lucas's excellent editing, which really saves that movie, I've heard that the original edit it was Marshall that really saved it. A lot of people went up to him and were like, "Man, I'm sorry, George. I'm so sorry, man," because they just didn't get it. But Steven Spielberg went up to him and was like, "Dude, I get it. I understand what you're doing. I think I like it, right?" And then nobody thought it was going to be anything other than sort of a B movie. And then it became, the Star Wars we know today. Could a movie like that, such an auteur level, singular vision that really doesn't have a team of bean counters hovering over the creators every single day. Could a movie like that be made today?
Well, I'll tell you what I think, and
Okay.
I know some about it, but I'm not an expert by any stretch. But I would say yes, for one simple reason. Since Lucas got his brass ring back then, think about how the industry has changed between then and now. I mean, he had to approach movie executives. He had to convince people. He had to shoot to get IPs when he couldn't do it. I mean, the funny thing is, another example of how that happened that was more recent was Peter Jackson with Lord of the Rings. He was getting turned down left and right. At one point, he almost tried to package them as 2 movies instead of 3, until what are they called over there?
New Line.
New Line told him, well, actually, maybe I think you should just go with 3. And crazy filming conditions, and yet they pulled off some serious magic. And I think the thing that got both of those done was, and I don't want to sound too hallmarky here, but it was that the creators believed in their product enough that they were willing to push where everyone else was like, this is a lost cause. They just wanted it so bad that they found a way to make it. Now, that's the one thing. But the other thing, too, is the fact that right now we're in an age where everyone is dying for original content. I mean, George Lucas had to try to get his movie into theaters. Right now, theaters are way and beyond what a lot of people are shooting for. They're shooting for Netflix.
Yeah.
They're shooting for even YouTube. And the thing is, people are entertaining their desires. They don't have to push nearly as hard as Lucas did to get his stuff in there. Now, Lucas also had to, he was dealing with a lot of stuff that was probably pretty unwieldy. He had to deal with models and huge sets and stuff, all of which can be done digitally or at least scaled down. Like Lucas did Star Wars, but before that he did THX 1138.
Yeah.
And I mean, that proved to the right people that he was a closer and that he could be trusted. That's something that I think a lot of people miss, is they want to go out and make the huge movie. But what I tell my writers and what I've been told over and over is, if you really want to sell a screenplay, don't write a huge budget. Write something you can shoot with your friends, and then go out and shoot it.
Yeah.
Even if it's just a piece of a film. And if you can do that and you can get it into festivals, people are going to start to notice a little bit more what you're up to. They'll start to see you as a person who can actually talk, but also deliver. And Lucas was able to do that. It took him time. He didn't just show up one day and said, "Hi, I'm a kid from wherever, California, and I went to USC, and I think you should give me this space movie." We never would have heard his name again.
Mm-hmm.
So he delivered, but then he went for the big stuff. And the cool thing is because of all the streaming services and this huge appetite for original content, people, like if George Lucas had tried that today, he would have had people saying, "Please tell us what you've got. We're interested," just because we need to get something out there. So
that's an interesting take, Brent.
It's interesting.
That actually restores my optimism a bit on being a creator in today's times. We have a comment from Jeff Calloway. Marshall Lucas added the Death Star attack on Yavin purely through editing. A totally different movie without the ticking clock. And then he says we should talk about her ripping Kathleen Kennedy and J.J. Abrams. It's glorious. Well, there's been a lot of negative pushback on the sequels, which we've touched on before. But I really want to focus on what Jeff said about Marsha editing. She, through sheer editing, added the ticking clock with, Death Star approaching and all that stuff.
Right.
Just to give us that sense of drama, because I believe in the original edit, they were just out in space blowing stuff up, and there was no real sense of pressure or a time clock running down, etc. And editing has so much to do with it. But again, I'm very confident now that, you know what, I'm going to sell a screenplay now because they're desperate, right? Right, Aaron? We're going to sell screenplays.
Yeah.
Of our
I
stuff.
think the funny thing, I think what you're asking, I think Brent answered your question, but I think he kind of missed a little bit. And I don't think he missed it on purpose. I think what he was asking is most movies, most high budget stuff that is being made today is based on a property that has built an audience.
Yes.
And I think what he was asking was, could somebody make a movie, something completely unique and different in Hollywood that does not have an already built-in audience, that is just completely new? We've never heard of this idea. We don't know what it is. I just have this vision. It's going to be cool. Because Lord of the Rings is a good example, but it has a well-built-in audience. I mean, that thing was popular in the 70s. So it's a little more of a safer bet. Star Wars was not a safer bet because there was no built-in audience, none. It was a complete risk. And I think that's kind of when he's asking, and this is, I think, why so many stuff's adapted from comic books and movies. And of course, the more stuff the more audience you build, the more they want to make your comic into a movie or whatnot. This also, to me, even in comics, is why I see so many independent comics. And when independent comics keeps doing superheroes and keep reiterating the same ideas, I'm like, especially when it comes to comic books, I mean, your imagination is a limit. I mean, you could draw anything you want. And so when somebody's drawing, like, I want a green alien in a spaceship. I had a friend who literally, he's like, okay, I have this little green frog alien who flies around in a spaceship. I'm like, seriously, dude? The little green man? Like you can do anything you want. And to go back on these obviously cliches or whatever, and it's like, there was a guy years ago who actually was creating this comic, and he kind of failed. And the original comic was this guy in the Brazilian jungle, like a Tarzan character fighting these mystical beasts. And it was different. I've never seen anything like it. He's like, that's not selling. He's like, superheroes sell. That's what you need to do. Superheroes sell. So he quit that comic and he did the superhero comic and failed in the first issue because it had been done before. He had something going, even though it wasn't getting a lot of attention. At least it was different if it found its audience. He did the superhero stuff. Like, why isn't it taken off? Everyone loves superheroes. I'm like, yes, Marvel and DC superheroes, not your superheroes. This is the catch-22 that I see people fall into all the time. I had a guy, he's like, well, if we make a sci-fi thing like Star Wars fans will come like my stuff. No, they're going to continuously like Star Wars stuff. They're not going to come like your stuff.
Yeah.
This is like this fallacy that people continuously have. And so in movies, take that to the extreme with it's much more budget, and I see a lot less things being made with the budget. This is why you have so many remakes, but the crowd just wants to. Yeah, exactly. There's the new tunes, they want the familiar hits. Exactly, same thing. So in movies, you compound this with money and stuff, and almost everything I come out has had a built-in audience somewhere. It always has, either video games, comics, or whatever. Rarely is there any new. The only new movie that came out of nowhere, no built-in audience, should be The Matrix. And what was that? 2000?
99.
99. Beyond that, what have you seen? Christopher Nolan has been able to do his own unique movies, but he had to prove himself with like Batman and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, what he was asking, and that I think is a much more harder argument. That would Hollywood, like, could I come up to Hollywood with like my comic Godly and say this would be amazing, be awesome? Do you have an audience? There's a few people know about it. They get out of here. They wouldn't even look at it.
Well, but the surprising thing is, and this again, there's some hope here.
Yeah.
It's almost like you're if the person would say, "I want to create my own stuff."
Yeah.
Is there an audience? The answer, I almost feel like, is the same as it was back then, which is, I'll bet you there is.
Yes.
But you're going to have to find it. That is the hardest part, because if you think about it, there are actually some pretty big stuffing, like the Tomorrow War with Chris Pratt on Amazon Prime. I don't think that was based on a property. I mean, it was really
it's not based on a property. There's a book called a book series called The Forever War. That's basically the same premise. So it's been around. The idea's been around many, many times.
Right. And I don't really know the story behind how that movie got made, but there are studios that are making things that don't have an audience that are new. But you can bet that those filmmakers didn't just show up and say, hey, we have this really cool concept for this war that you fight in the future with people from today. And hey, Amazon, why don't you just give us a ton of money? Amazon would immediately then say, what have you already done? And if you had not a resume, but a reel, or even not a reel, like if you had a body of work that built up to that, then that would, Amazon would take your calls probably.
Yeah.
In fact, they may be making calls to you. So
yeah, I definitely think so. Even with Mike Gollings is definitely unique. Now it's not as unique as European comics, 'cause I love European comics. But man, some of the storytelling, I'm like, I don't know what's going on. It looks super pretty, but I can't figure it out. And that's just different in storytelling. But yeah, Mike Gollings.
Today,
What?
I'm sorry, I was just going to interject because it segues into what you were saying. A lot of publishers today, you try to, if you were trying to get work with the mainstream publishers, the standard answer nowadays really is, build your own audience with your own material, and we'll think about it, right? But then you think, well, if I'm going to work that hard to build my audience,
why would I come back to you?
Then why would I come back to play with your toys when I just created my own toys that I can benefit from? So
this is why I tell people all the time.
It's almost like they're saying no thanks. It's like, okay, that's totally cool. I mean, that it's almost a blessing in a way, because then it forces you to really create your own universes, your own characters. And I wanted to also speak to Aaron. You were saying that there's always been this challenge. I remember being in art school, and I would do a traditional painting or traditional drawing.
Right.
And the hipster crowd always go, it's been done before, right?
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, but no, I haven't done it, right?
Exactly.
So this is my take on, an Arthurian scene or something classic like that. But still, everyone turned their nose up at it. Many did, not everyone. Many turned their nose up at it. It's like, and they were the ones doing the, decoupage, or, hey, we're gonna polyurethane excrement on canvas, and that's just so cutting edge and da-da-da. So then it becomes about politics, right? And so that's not even a thing. So what you have to do really is it is about the content, but it's also about your unique interpretation of the content.
Yes.
So you could do spandex superheroes if you're doing them in your own unique way, and no one's quite done them like that before.
I think storyline, perfect. I think what comes down to the first thing, especially with comic books, the first thing you notice is visuals. Yes. So you need to, I think, in a way, develop a unique spin, either the visually how your art looks or how they look. There is a comic called, and I think it's called Copra, Copra, by Image. Okay. It's a superhero comic. It wasn't my thing per se, but it was very, very unique looking in the way it was drawn, and the superheroes and their powers are very unique, very different. I read the first 2 volumes and it just didn't grab me as much, but it's actually really popular. That is that's a perfect example of taking superhero spandex, and man, does this look different. It looks just different. And it's done by Image, so there is room for it. But I see a lot of people who, my superhero and it's drawn like Jack Kirby and it's got the same costume or whatever. Well, people will see that and be like, oh, well, that's the same thing I've always read. And you can have the most unique story possible. In fact, I know a gentleman who's writing, he told me his whole superhero story. I'm like, this sounds really cool and unique. But all his superheroes look like the classic sort of 70s, 80s superheroes, and they got the muscles and they're drawn the same. I'm like, yeah, but no one's going to know that unique story, because when they're going to see the veneer, they're going to be like, yeah, I've been there, done that. So if you're going to have a unique story, you got to have at least have that visual hook to get people, well, this looks different, whatever. My Godlings is that way. I mean, there's people
Very
stop by and just be like, what is all this? Who's this blue dude with, what? And that could backfire on me because it's too weird, or it can hook people because I'm that way. I'm the person, if I see something unique, I'm picking it up. Or I see regular superheroes, I'm like, no, I don't care. Even it could be the most unique story, totally grab me, but if I see it, it looks the same, I'm walking by. But it looks something different. Yeah.
You're saying you're a visual snob, Aaron. If it's visually not cool enough and hip enough, you're going to walk away.
I think it's not so much visual hip enough. It's just visually different. Something I've never seen, like that Cobra. I chuck out that Cobra because I've never seen anything like this. Turned out storytelling wasn't my thing, but visually, and I still think visually is cool, and some of the powers are really cool. I just think so. I think there has to be there's a visual hook to get people into the story hook. And that's
I
real
agree.
hard to do. And of course books have it much harder because you've got the cover to draw them in to read this thing. You can't look through a book and be like, hey, the word does in there. I've never seen that before.
Right. Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's a little harder. Comics are a little easier.
It is
You can do
hard.
it.
Comics we've got a little easier because you got visual story. You
You
pictures
could flip
telling
through
the
and be like,
story.
wow, I've never seen this. Yeah. And it
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah.
work. Some people want the same old, same old. And I'm not saying there are some superhero people like, oh, that's the superheroes I used to read. I want that. So I'm not saying at all, but it seems like this is why I think anime is kind of their edge on us because people have talked so much about animation is overtaking the American comic. Uh, Even though the anime generally looks the same, there are weird visual hooks. Like I saw one where this guy has a chainsaw coming out of his head. Like
That's
what?
crazy.
Like you got to stop by and check out like what is this, right? Ghost in the Shell, you had like the little spider mechs or whatever, or Kira
Sure,
with the. I
sure.
mean, there's visual differences
There's
between it,
something unique. I
world
agree with
building
you.
or
I agree.
whatever. Even though they're all kind of
Yeah.
drawn with the big eyes and stuff, American comics sometimes kind of falter a little bit on that. Not all the time, but sometimes. And I think there's tropes and everything. I'm not going to sit there and argue it's not tropes. And you read enough manga, there's tons of manga
Oh yeah,
tropes,
yeah.
just like American tropes. But I do think the one thing I do think is kind of hurting comics a little bit on the internet is the continuous talk of Marvel and DC. Like even when I listen to people talk about comics, it's always like, let's talk about Marvel and DC. And what they're
Mhm.
not doing is they're not doing a service that Marvel and DC are actually still, even though they're big, they are shrinking. There was much, even with Image and other, there was many more titles and much more. But every time people watch comics, all they hear is about Marvel and DC, Marvel and DC, Marvel. Any show on YouTube is always talking about Marvel and DC. They never mention like, oh yeah, I read Grendel. They're making a TV show out of Grendel, right? I mean,
No kidding.
Grendel. Like even Saga is this huge selling book. I hardly hear anyone talk about Saga online. So how is that getting its attention, right? Walking Dead TV show, so they got that right. Judge Dredd, there's still so many people don't even know who Judge Dredd is, right? I'm just like, okay, really? I mean, when the movie Dredd came out, you mean the Stallone movie? Yeah, okay. Europe weeps because you don't even know their basic superhero. And but it's still yeah.
I know what you're saying, but here's some good news. I was talking to an organizer for a Memphis show, and we were he hadn't heard about Silverline, about us and what we're doing.
Yeah.
And so I was breaking it down for him, and I said, "Look, here's what we're about. We're basically an independent company. We do PG-13 stuff. There's no porn, but there's also no politics. This is straight up action adventure escapism for the most part. We've got themes here, whether it's philosophical, cosmic like yours, or whether it's action, thriller, spy like what Brent does, or whether it's like what I'm doing, action adventure. We've got a little bit of everything, but our focus is the storytelling, the characters, the content, and those of us who are trying to push ourselves to do more unique visuals from an artistic point of view. It's all there, and he was intrigued. Man, he was excited. He's like, "Man, I hadn't heard of Silverline." I'm like, "Dude, you got to go check out our website. You got to listen to our podcasts. We are doing what Image was doing in the early 90s. I mean, we're doing that. That's what we're doing.
We are. And our newer titles, I think, are actually pushing the envelope. Steam Patriots is something you never see. We have Twilight Grims. We have the horror stuff in Twilight Grim, Fire Rush. I'm actually looking at the background now. Trumps is this cool sci-fi element. I mean, like this sort of Game of Thrones sci-fi element. And even Divinity, even though she has powers, is not superhero at all. It's more of a So there's a lot of stuff. And I think coming out that we are really doing unique things. And I think we have superheroes in there, but it's a very small part of it. And there's many more unique things. I think that's going to be to our benefit. Hopefully going forward. I don't know. I do remember, and it's funny. I talked to my friend, and I'll bring this up and see if you guys think about this.
All right.
Do you remember when Lady Death came out? Evil Ernie.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
He kind of created maybe a horror universe, this sort of universe based around the horror genre. And I can't remember if his own company or not, but I've often wondered if somebody made a comic book company that basically created a sci-fi universe. They kind of did this. The fantasy universe was kind of done a little bit with CrossGen, which was done a long time ago.
Yeah.
But sometimes instead of having a company do so many diverse titles, which is most comic book companies, do you think they could be more successful if they did company only made horror comics or sci-fi comics or fantasy comics and actually built a connective like Marvel Universe around that? Like he kind of did that with Lady Death. Evil, Ernie, and all of them were connected in the universe.
Sure.
And I thought about that, especially with fantasy. I mean, if you can connect like and make your own fantasy world, like a Marvel Universe, I could see people in the fantasy totally getting into that. Like
We've talked about that.
Yeah.
We've talked about that in previous broadcasts and so on. I think it's only a positive thing. I think if you limit yourself out of the gate and say all these things have to connect, you may be putting yourself in a bit of a box.
Right. And to make it boring after a while.
Yeah, but I think we've got if you just trust your instincts, all of us, and do what we love. I think that with all these brilliant minds in this company, we could easily mesh the universes together, even if it was with portals and time travel.
Oh, this was not a rip on Silverline or any of that. I was just curious if people have thought about making it more, because strange enough, there's been movie companies that do nothing but horror movies. And I always thought that was unique. I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And it's like how targeted audience. I mean, we make horror movies, horror fans. Come see it, so I wondered if that would work for comics and other things, but I don't know if people not buying as many comics and books nowadays, if that would actually be a hindrance than a positive. Like I can see that maybe working for horror movies, but if you made like a whole company, like we do nothing but horror books, maybe not a lot of horror fans read books as much as see horror movies. So I don't know. So there's always, it depends on the medium you're promoting that into.
It depends on the medium. Yeah. And I think to your point, you would have to have quite a comprehensive state. I mean, you have to have a lot of titles.
Yeah,
like you just said 3 or 4, because some people might like supernatural horror, some people like paranormal, some people like slasher, some people like mystery thriller. Like Hitchcock is a type of horror, but it's not the same as Lovecraft, and it's not the same as
it's like Jason or Freddy or whatever.
Horror.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's just an interesting idea.
A nice range.
Right, exactly. And it's not like companies haven't done that. I mean, didn't Marvel do that with like the Midnight Suns or whatever, where it was like this little horror universe?
They've tried to sub-genre stables. They've tried. There's like the Marvel Knights. Remember that?
Yeah. I remember that. That was like the Punisher, and like there was like the street
Punisher,
level
Daredevil,
people.
Moon Knight. The sort of street level action hero types. Sometimes it works because it becomes this subgenre, but to me, I always thought, well, it's just another way to do number ones for those.
Yeah, it is. It is a way to do number ones.
Well, and I think actually DC is doing a horror imprint that's being run by Joe Hill, who did Lock and Key.
Yeah.
I think it's called Hill House or something, and he had a couple of books he wrote himself and a couple others that some other people did. I have no idea if it's still around or not.
They actually did that years ago, if you guys remember, with Clive Barker. Do you guys
I remember that. Yes. Marvel did that, right?
Yeah, I think it was Marvel. It did some Clive Barker stuff. Now, that was it. Like, I like Clive Barker, but man, he wasn't a fit for Marvel. That guy needs to kind of go off the hook.
Didn't they have like an epic imprint, which allowed for a little more R-rated content? They had like an Epic. I think it was called Epic, but it was a subsidiary of Marvel.
And he had like these, I remember buying a few that were like these crazy superheroes or whatever. I know Epic during Marvel had the more sci-fi stuff. I think Alien Legion, which is I'm a fan of, I think that was under the Epic imprint. So was
Larry Stroman.
And then there was a Star Blazer, or a guy with a beard. He was like a pirate he had like a sword. Does this sound? Oh, God.
Star Slammers or something like that?
Star, he was like this pirate character, and I remember his sword had this weird sort of axe.
Was it Dreadstar?
That's it, Dreadstar. I think that was under Epic too. There was a few of them, like that. And I think that works well. Yeah.
When we get so large, Aaron, we're so big and so huge that we start doing subgenre.
Yeah, subdivisions. So,
and what's funny though, if you think about it, is those books came out in the 80s.
Yeah.
When when the comic book audience probably was still very much about like, where's Spider-Man? How come Dreadstar's and teaming up with Spider-Man?
Yeah.
But what's funny is the comic book audiences matured,
Yeah.
In fact, that's part of the problem for the industry is they're having a hard time finding younger readers.
We've matured too much. Yes, I know. I
Yeah.
really.
But what's fun is that, like, I as a consumer loved G.I. Joe comics, then I loved Adventure comics, I loved all those. But now I'm older, and frankly, I kind of want to see some comics. I love the comics medium, but I want to see some real stories. I want to see some real depth. And that's, in a way, the comic industry is hurting because they don't know how to find new readers. On the other hand, there is more of a sense of you can actually do good stories without an IP and actually get an audience. So in a weird way, it's a scary time to be in the industry, but it's also kind of a cool time.
It is a cool time. Kids comics are big money, especially Scholastic. But if you could do kids comics or whatever, kids buy them or whatever. I heard that my kids' books are published through Action Lab, and they kind of they hit with that. Well, they did a more adult, but that they hit this one called Princeless. They did. And that took off, and that was a kids. And my Godling, strangely enough, even though it's got philosophy, is aimed at YA. It's a young adult sort of take on it, so it's aimed at that direction. Now, whether or not people will see it as that, I have no idea. But that's what I'm aiming it at.
Well, you know what? It's a good approach. Arguably, J.K. Rowling did that with Harry Potter, right? Because technically you would call that YA, but because of the unique structure of the storytelling, the school sort of template, and even though we don't really have boarding schools, but not as prevalent in a way that England does and so on, we could relate to going to school and being hassled by bullies and mean teachers and all that. And so that's sort of the window, the common experience window that brought everyone into Harry Potter, whether you were an adult or whether you were a kid. You sort of could get pulled into that world. I thought that was sort of a brilliant device.
Yeah, and a lot of Europeans don't shy away from like the more adult stuff in Harry Potter when like they do the sacrifice and Voldemort and they're cutting off his hand and stuff. That stuff would be, oh no, we can't do that YA. But Europe has always never shied away. I mean, they make their stuff aimed at kids almost as dark as adults in some ways, not all the ways, but they do. And I think that's actually to the benefit, because I think kids feel a little empowered, like, oh, they're letting me experience this, or letting me. And even Gollings is in a way of kind of, even though I talk about philosophy in there, I kind of try to talk in layman's terms. The idea is to get kids interested in these, just at least think about these ideas a little bit. That's the idea, which I think sometimes there's a point where you kind of talk their level, but in a few instances you talk a little over their heads. They get kids like, oh, that's it, like bait them a little. Talk over their heads.
I think though that you're serving them well, Aaron, because I still believe to this day one of the reasons there is a almost universal affection for Empire Strikes Back is because what you're doing is a coming of age story that has the sort of Zen philosophy sort of introduced through Yoda, and it's sort of, he's teaching Luke, okay, in this universe, there's good and evil, and it's very clear. And here's what happens if you choose one. Here's what happens if you choose the other. Be careful. You got to be trained before you approach it in this particular fashion. And so there's this affection for that story because we're seeing a flawed individual in Luke that we can identify with. And he's given these instructions by a wise mentor that are universal themes.
Yeah.
And if you can talk about universal themes along with the fireworks show, to me, that's sort of the best of all worlds, right? Because you get the cheap seats and the expensive seats, right? You get everybody. So, Shakespeare wrote that way too. He wrote for the cheap seats and then he wrote for the aristocracy.
You could put a little,
everybody got something out of the plays.
The Matrix does a good job of that. Putting in philosophy, but then also making it like guns and cool stuff.
Yeah,
definitely.
So, well, everyone, this is a wonderful place, I think, for us to sort of say our good nights. We're approaching the end of the show. Before we close out, though, I want to make sure we get all our comics in.
Yeah.
And we also want to talk about some Kickstarters. Do we have a Kickstarter going on? Roland mentioned. You want to talk about that a little bit, Aaron?
I don't know. I think we do. I think it's some book, Brent. Right? Do you write books, Brent?
Yes.
Yeah,
As
yeah.
a matter of
That's
fact.
right. Did you write this book that's on Kickstarter right now from Silverline called Kalis? Did you write
Yeah.
that?
It's
You did.
dude. I was still trying to think of a good thing to say about Empire Strikes Back, but you're right. Yeah, I created and wrote the Silverline book Kalis, and right now, 4 days remaining on the Kickstarter and on the Indiegogo, and we hit our goal very quickly on Kickstarter. We still got a bit of a ways to go on Indiegogo. So for anyone who hasn't gotten on there yet and is interested, go to Indiegogo first. If you really want some cool art, Kickstarter is probably a better bet. But if you're just looking for the books or the trade paperback, the issues 3 and 4 are what are being on Kickstarter and Indiegogo, and the trade paperback. So if that's all you want, then go to Indiegogo. And I think the address is at the bottom of the ticker down there. And yeah, we've only got 4 days to go. So get yourself over there.
And that being said, I think it's time to run a little Kalis promo. What do you think, Aaron?
Yeah,
you think
definitely.
Run this Kalis promo? Let's run a Kalis promo, everybody.
Hi, welcome to the crowdfunder for Kalis. I'm Roland Mann, and I run Silverline, the genre-spanning independent comic and graphic novel publishing company. And I'm here to tell you about Kalis. So come with me, let me tell you the story.
Hey everybody, my name is Brent Larson. I'm the creator and writer of the Silverline comic book Kalis. We very successfully launched issues 1 and 2 in the last couple of years. And I'm really excited to announce that in September we're going to be launching issues 3 and 4 simultaneously. The story is about Scott Anders, an astronaut who went up into space in the 60s on a mysterious mission for the CIA before disappearing. But he has reemerged today, seemingly not having aged and also a little bit invulnerable. In this story, in issues 3 and 4, you'll learn more about where he came from, why does he want to go back, who's the group that's trying to keep him here on Earth, and also what the word Kalis actually means. I'm sorry it took me so long. Some of you are thinking, hey man, that's a really long time to wait around for a comic book story to wrap up, to which I say, I totally agree, which is why we're also going to be launching a trade paperback that has all 4 issues in it. I hope you enjoy this story, and I know you'll enjoy Louis and Leandro's art. As always, it is gorgeous. I love it. So thank you again for your interest and for your support, and I hope you enjoy it. Thanks.
Science fiction, action, super stuff. You're going to want to check it out because you love that kind of stuff. You know you do. If you're new to Silverline, I got information I got to tell you. We've run 11 Kickstarters and successfully printed, shipped, and fulfilled all 11 of them. In fact, we're only like 2 weeks away from fulfilling our 12th one. So we know how to do this. We know how to make comic books. We know how to print them. We know how to ship them. In this day and age of unfulfilled crowdfunders, both on Indiegogo and on Kickstarter, I need to let you know that. You guys need to know that your pledge is secure with us, because we're going to get you the content. Now, we hope you like the stuff, but we're going to get it to you. So please consider backing Kalis, because you're going to get some cool stuff. And if you can't back, please consider sharing it. If you like comics, put this into the hands of folks that you know who like comics. We love comics, we love making comics, and we love you reading the comics that we make. And remember to make mine Silverline.
And we're back. I have no idea who that guy was talking online. Never seen him before.
Isn't it great to have Roland talk about your book, and then you get on and talk about your book, and you look like you're that close to falling asleep, and then Roland gets back on, and he's really excited and just saves the whole thing. So
I want to clone Roland and bring him on, make a bench, and people are like, "What's your book about?" Well, and I just like bring Roland out of the thing. Let him tell you.
Bring your laptop to the con. And be like, You want to know about my book? And just like open it. Boom, here you go.
That would
Engage
be
Roland
we
protocol.
appreciate.
I know, Gage Roland. Yeah, I always sound like, what's my book about? I'm like, stuff, things, whatever. Just buy it and read it. I don't
I'm
know.
gonna read it. I don't
It's
know.
really
You're gonna
cool.
like it.
Yeah.
Whatever. That being said, folks, we enjoyed the broadcast tonight. Everybody, Aaron, thank you. Brent, thank you for joining tonight.
Yeah.
And as we always like to close out our shows, we want to say, make mine
Silver
silver
line.
line. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.